Good evening, everyone. I'm Monica Harris, Executive Director of FAIR, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's webinar, DEI and the Future Landscape of Higher Education. Joining me this evening will be Ilya Shapiro, Dorian Abbott, and Professor Zach DiPiero. I'm sorry, Professor Dorian Abbott. We have two professors, and Professor Zach DiPiero. A little bit about Ilya. He's a Senior Fellow and Director of Constitutional Studies at the Manhattan Institute. He was previously executive director and a senior lecturer at the Georgetown Center for the Constitution. And before that, he was vice president of the Cato Institute. He lectures regularly on behalf of the Federalist Society. He's a member of the Board of Fellows of the Jewish Policy Center and was an adjunct law professor at Georgetown University and the University of Mississippi. Ilya is the author of the new book, Lawless: The Miseducation of American Elites. Dorian Abbott is a professor in the Department of Geophysical Sciences at the University of Chicago. He holds a BA in physics, an MA in applied mathematics, and a PhD in applied mathematics, all from Harvard. He's written more than 100 peer-reviewed scientific manuscripts on subjects related to climate, paleoclimate, and planetary dynamics. Dorian was awarded the Hero of Intellectual Freedom Award from the American Council of Trustees and Alumni in 2021. And the Courage Open Inquiry Award from the Heterodox Academy in 2022. And finally, Zach DiPiero is an assistant professor of English at Northampton Community College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. He previously taught at UPenn, Penn State, and two high-risk schools in the Philadelphia School District. And in the summer of 2023, thanks to funding from FAIR, Zach brought a lawsuit against his former employer, Penn State University, for numerous charges, including a hostile work environment claim based on racial discrimination under Title VII. Nearly 1 year ago, in January 2024, this claim notably and importantly survived a motion to dismiss from an Obama-appointed judge. His case currently awaits the judge's opinion on Penn State's motion for summary judgment. We're all standing by, waiting with bated breath. And if and hopefully when this motion is denied, Zach's case will proceed to trial. We're all excited about that. So I'd like to jump right into this. Guys, over the past 3 weeks, the Trump administration has issued a lot of executive orders, and many of them appear to be aimed at reducing, if not entirely eliminating, DEI programs and practices at the federal level. The question many of us have now is how, if at all, these orders will potentially impact students, faculty, and administrators on college and university campuses. So what I'd like to do is take each order one at a time and walk through what all of you think will be the implications legally and practically, because I think we all know those are very different things. So let's start with the first order, which is ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity. So Ilya, can you lay out in layman's terms, what's in this order? Explain what the legal impact will be on DEI in college and university campuses.
Yeah, this was one of the day one orders, or day two, I guess, dated the 21st. But as we were talking before, the titles of these orders don't mince any words. They're bold and they're descriptive, and the idea is to accept and enforce the Civil Rights Act of 1964, meaning you can't discriminate based on race and other immutable characteristics, but none of the postmodern theoretical architecture that's been built on top of that. So this particular order rescinds a number of executive actions going back not just to the Biden or even Obama or even Clinton administration. Some from all of those are rescinded, but even a very famous one from LBJ, the Equal Employment Opportunity or Affirmative Action one. Again, this does not purport to change or rescind any aspect of actual civil rights law, but the way that these have gotten interpreted and applied by executive actions to promote diversity qua racial targets, affirmative action, meaning not just making sure that you're recruiting from a wide base, but having some sort of balancing, a workforce that, quote, looks like America, all of those sorts of things. And so the purpose of it is to end equity programs, which have been applied to mean equality of outcome, and diversity that has become racial balancing, all sorts of DEI trainings that advance that kind of controversial ideology, and revert to bona fide employment and educational qualifications. And I say educational, there's going to be more on this. Within 120 days, the Attorney General and the Secretary of Education are charged with issuing new guidance about how every institution that receives higher education funds, how they will comply with the removal of DEI and with the Supreme Court ruling that outlaws the use of racial preferences in admissions.
So it's interesting that you mentioned the executive order that Lyndon Johnson signed. I think it was 1965. Executive order, what is it, 11246, something like that. And I'm really glad you called this out, because I think a lot of people were under the I think misimpression that this executive order that was just issued last month rescinded the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which isn't the case. So the affirmative action executive order that LBJ issued in 65, that was, in my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that was intended to address what was at the time really, really blatant discrimination, particularly in schools, following the Brown v. Board of Education.
Well, this one was more about employment and contracting, this particular one. And okay. So that's why, for example, the order also closed the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, OFCCP, in the Department of Labor. Because that one was seen as being one of the biggest ones. You don't hear about the Department of Labor in this context, but that for those who follow this area of legal policy, that was seen as one of the nerve centers of DEI implementation.
I see. Okay. Interesting. So, Dorian, I also note, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it looks like this order implements measures and practices to ensure that schools comply with the Supreme Court's ruling in Students for Fair Admissions v. Harvard. You're familiar with that case, or you're not? Oh, yeah. So do you think most schools are currently complying with Students for Fair Admissions? And if not, how do you think they're avoiding compliance, and what can be done to ensure compliance under this order, if anything?
Well, there was a lawsuit that was just filed by Jonathan Mitchell, Texas lawyer, and he against University of California system, basically saying that they were violating, I think it's the state law about this stuff secretly. And so maybe there'll be some discovery or something and there'll be more information. But basically, we had at the University of Chicago, I'm on the college council for the undergrads, and the admissions people came and they kind of made it clear that they don't like what they have to do and they're going to try to not do it as much as they can. They can do things like ask for essays describing how your identity has influenced your, development as a person or something like that, and then use that to try to increase the number of people that they want and decrease the number of people they don't want. So I think that will be the sort of strategy. One thing that the University of California system did after they were not allowed to do racial balancing was they did zip code balancing. And then the other obvious thing is you throw out tests. So
throw out, did you say throw out?
Yeah, like tests or any other objective standard you get rid of, and that just gives you more flexibility to do whatever you want. So
you mean like SATs, for example? Okay, I got you.
SATs, GPAs, you can get rid of any sort of objective. I mean, the problem with GPAs is it's so different among different schools. The SAT is at least a uniform measuring stick, But you definitely start by filling that out or not requiring it. You could try to do balancing by zip code if they allow you to do that. And then you can have questions, essay questions that elicit the information you want to do the balancing you want. Those are sort of the techniques.
Okay. So do you think realistically, well, you know what, let me ask Zach, because you're the guy I can always count on to give a real world assessment, just cut to the chase. So from your perspective, Zach, based on what you're seeing at the college, the college you're at right now, do you think this order will have any practical effect? Or do you think it's, just something that's really going to like be more powerful on paper?
I like what Dorian had to say. I think he nailed it with the sort of wraparound efforts like college admissions essays. But I'm at a community college right now, Monica, and they welcome everybody. There's no gatekeeping as it pertains to who gets in to the college. So it's sort of not applicable to my current situation.
Okay. So, and I don't know if you keep in touch with any of your colleagues at Penn State. If you were still there now, and assuming the environment now is as it was when you left it about a year or 2 years ago, what do you think, if anything, what kind of changes do you think we're going to see at a place like Penn State based on this order?
Well, I was doom scrolling on LinkedIn the other day, just sort of like muscle memory, killing time.
I'm scrolling on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And well, people freaking out and all that kind of stuff.
Right, right.
And somebody wrote, they can take those three precious letters, DEI, but they'll never take away our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all there is to say here. I mean, really. So I think that this effort, the executive order, it makes sense to me. It's coming from a place of fairness and merit and color blindness. These are all good qualities, I believe.
Mhm.
Yet this stuff is so deeply entrenched in the culture of higher ed. I mean, you've got like real true believers there. So they're not gonna, I don't think they're gonna stop this mission. I think you've got, like, I think once upon a time you had educators who just so happened to be DEI activists, but maybe nowadays you have a lot more DEI activists who just so happen to be employed as instructors. And that's a big difference. So, they'll change the names of these things. I've got some real bad news for you. Bad news for you, Monica. You're not going to like this.
Oh, geez, what?
There's one. So I got
Oh,
two.
not fair. They're not calling it fair.
Get ready for this. So,
Ready?
so the Michigan Technological University, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, will now be known as the Office of Engagement and Belonging. So, sounds nice.
Yes, it does.
Trying to look the other way kind of thing. But then here's the other one. There's a new framework called FAIR.
I know.
And the FAIR framework stands for Fairness, Access, Inclusion, and Belonging. And that was in the Harvard Business Review just in the past week. So
I saw that review. So it's fairness, access, inclusion, and belonging. Where's the R?
good question. Yeah.
Fade. It's fade. We can call it fade.
Look, the lawyer's answer is that you have to be vigilant that these executive orders are not going to be self-executing. And I imagine there are plans for Education Department, Justice Department officials to follow up on these things.
Yeah, now, but that also raises a good point. Ilya, what is the likelihood? All of these executive orders, or if not all of them, most of them are going to be challenged if they're not already currently being challenged. If this executive order is challenged, what is the likelihood that it will survive?
I don't know what the challenge would be because, you live by the pen and phone and tweet. You die by the pen and phone and tweet. You can always rescind executive orders. if someone is alleging that getting rid of this department makes it impossible to enforce actual civil rights law, good luck making that claim. I don't think that's viable. So, while certain of the executive orders, I think we're approaching 60 at this point. Certainly, there are legal challenges to birthright citizenship and certain other things, impoundment of money and things like that have already been in court. But something like this, ending previous executive orders, giving different directions as to how federal law will be applied, I don't see a viable legal avenue to that. That's why there haven't been, that I'm aware of. Otherwise, I think we would be aware of. Trump's DEI order has been, sued by the ACLU or whoever, right? And that hasn't happened.
Good. Excellent. All right, so let's move on. We have the second order is ending radical and wasteful programs. Ilya, we'll just pick it up with you again.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about
this? This is related to the previous one.
Okay.
I think it was actually issued before the previous one that we discussed, but this more affects the federal government itself, not contractors, not grantees of education or other funds, but within the federal government, the personnel, the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, they're just directed to root out all of those DEI programs and officials that were installed, especially under the Biden administration. And this is interesting, not just DEI or DEIA, I forget what the A was in this context, but environmental justice as well, which has proliferated in recent years, and targeting specifically equity action plans, equity-related grants and contracts, and directing employees to be reviewed based on, quote, individual initiative, skills, performance, and hard work, and shall not under any circumstances consider DEI or DEIA factors, goals, policies, mandates, or requirements. So again, this is reorganizing and taking action within the federal government itself. Okay.
And so again, it's targeting the federal government and federal government agencies, employees, contractors, and whatnot. What is the practical effect for colleges and universities that may not be public? Let's just say a Harvard.
This particular one does not affect colleges and universities. So the one that we just discussed, the one that we started with, there are relate to federal grants and relate to the implementation of Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard. That obviously directly affects higher education, but this one is about the federal government. It could affect grantees and programs, to the effect that the federal agency, be it the Department of Education or otherwise, that has some sort of equity action program, it could indirectly thereby affect the higher education institutions if those programs within the executive agency is being curtailed.
Okay, so only to that limited extent. All right, then. Very good. So let's move on then to the. I think this is the one that's probably going to resonate most with people. Restoring free speech and ending federal censorship, and also the additional measures to combat anti-Semitism. So Ilya, I know this has probably been one of the biggest issues on campus, especially since October 7th. I know this was really welcomed by a lot of other nonpartisan organizations like FIRE. So can you lay out the terms for us and explain what you think the legal impact will be of both of these executive orders? We can take them one at a time, but on colleges and university campuses.
Yeah, so the one about freedom of speech and ending censorship, a lot of that is aimed at the online stuff, the social media platforms that were downgrading, shadow banning, all of that sort of thing, the collusion between the government and the platforms. So it's ending that, and it says that no taxpayer resources shall be used to engage and facilitate any conduct that would unconstitutionally abridge the free speech of any American citizen. So that certainly can and will be read to strengthen or enforce the strings tied to federal education funding, to make sure that colleges and universities are not engaged in censorship, that they're protecting their students and faculty free speech rights. And then on the other hand, the combating anti-Semitism one, it's to use all tools to prosecute, remove, and otherwise hold to account the perpetrators of unlawful anti-Semitic harassment and violence. So it's not meant to go after anti-Semitic speech. I don't think there's a way to read the two together to say that anti-Semitic speech is not no longer allowed, but it's kind of putting back what was in place under the first Trump administration. There was an executive order about anti-Semitism that Biden never rescinded, but I don't think he really implemented it. And so higher ed institutions are on notice that they really need to comply with their obligations under Title VI to ensure equal educational opportunities, and not, if they're aware of people being harassed or intimidated or blocked from accessing buildings and programs, that they need to put a stop to that. And to that end, earlier this week, I believe it's 5 universities are now being investigated by the education department for insufficiently rooting out anti-Semitic actions.
Okay. And what about DEI statements and pledges that professors are have been until now required to make? Will this mean that they no longer have to do those because it's a form of compulsory speech?
I imagine that's how it's going to be interpreted.
Okay. So Dorian, let's turn to you first. What do you think? Well, first of all, let's take a step back, Dorian. Why don't you tell us what experience, if any, you've had with censorship on campus, either censorship that you might have experienced as a professor, or censorship, compulsory speech, or censorship that you might have seen amongst your students, either direct censorship or self-censorship. So just tell us a little bit about what you've been experiencing.
Can you see this?
Oh, yes, you're sharing your screen. Wonderful. Yes, I can see that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go in a slightly different direction.
Oh,
And I have a game theoretic question related to these orders that I've been thinking about, and I'm curious about what you guys think about it. I mean, the basic answer to your question is people self-censor all the time. It's hard to say anything. I don't go to events at the university anymore because someone might report something I say to the Stasi, and I don't want to deal with that.
the Stasi.
Yeah, it's just like, it's a terrible atmosphere. It kills all creativity. Okay, but here's what the question that I have about all these 4 orders that I've been thinking about, and I'm curious what you guys think. So I'm drawing an axis. The vertical axis is a sanity axis, which goes from crazy to sane, and the horizontal axis is time. And now I'm going to draw what I think is the baseline of where we were before these orders, which is that red line, that scenario 1, which is going to crazy, off drifting to infinity of craziness. And now I'm going to draw one option of these where the orders bring us towards sane, but then the next Democrat president does opposite orders, and we just get into an unstable oscillation that grows like this to infinity. Okay, that's one option. And then the next option I want to draw is what I'm hopeful for, which is something like a damped oscillation. And so this is where the game theory comes in, that the threat of the other guys pushing back, which is now exists, which didn't exist before, sort of damps out the oscillation and leads to some sort of equilibrium where both sides reach a point they can agree with. So, there's no MAGA statements and there's no DEI statements or something like that. And so I'm sort of curious about what do you guys think is going to happen from these executive orders, when the next president, Democrat side is in power? Are they just going to be completely torn up and reversed and go even crazier in the other direction? Or is the fact that Trump and his team are standing up and finally pushing back going to make them say, well, if we go too far the other way, they're going to go even more too far the next time and sort of lead to an equilibrium? So that's my question. I'm curious what you guys think.
Well, Zach, why don't you take that first? It's a great question.
I was following along with the visual of your description of it, Dorian. I couldn't see it on my end.
Oh,
But-
you can't. I'm sorry, you couldn't see it.
I could not see it. But I think what you're getting at is kind of like this presidential administration pendulum theory, right? Which is sort of like how we seem to elect presidents to the everything's a reaction to a reaction. So that would be my answer to how this would probably play out, unless maybe like the Democrats pivot to the moderate side of the base, and then maybe that to sort of try to answer your question, maybe this oscillation thing doesn't happen.
Well, everything's a reaction to a reaction, but the question is, do the reactions damp or do they enhance each other and cause a resonant explosion of the system that just gets crazier and crazier oscillations? That's sort of my question.
Well, it depends on whether this administration, whenever the Republican control of the White House ends, whether it's with Trump, whether it's with, in 8 years, whether that effectively changes society such that even when the Democrats win, they recognize that, Biden's insinuation of DEI commissars in every agency is just not tremendously unpopular. We'd rather use our political capital on other things.
And another way to say that is, if this is successful, there isn't a next Democrat administration unless they acknowledge that. They just won't get elected.
Well, but I mean, people get elected for all sorts of things. If there's a deep recession, there could be a reaction, without any change of, cultural shift.
That's a good point. But Ilya, do you guys see, or maybe this is just my perspective, but it seems to me that the only reason Trump is in office now, barely, I mean, this whole idea of winning by a landslide, I don't buy it. But the only reason he's in office now is because there seems to be a group of Americans, I would call them the silent or exhausted majority, that are looking to stay more in the center. They don't want to swing too far to the right. To use your pendulum analogy, Zach, they don't want to swing too far to the left. They don't want to swing too far to the right. So going back to the graph or the game theory image that Dorian was putting on that you didn't see, Zach, it seems to me that lends itself towards us achieving some stasis. I mean, sooner rather, I don't know when, maybe not in the immediate future, but I don't think these pendulum swings these wild swings aren't natural. And it seems to me that
another way of saying that is Americans want normalcy. They elected Biden in 2020 barely because of Trump's successes.
Yes.
And Biden fulfilled his entire mandate of not being Trump the moment that he was sworn in, but then he, governed as if he was FDR's, hyper progressive great grandchild or something, vast overstepping. Trump, some of these things, a lot of the things he's doing are popular. They poll well. He's has a positive public confidence rating for the first time, period, right now. So it depends how much and whether he oversteps.
So Dorian, you got us going with a really good question, but I want to come back to what I asked Zach, which is, tell me what you've been seeing on campus in terms of self-censorship. I mean, yeah, any examples, or I'm curious to sort of like get a better sense of what the environment was like for you the past few years, and if you think, practically speaking, from your perspective, you think these orders will change anything.
Well, yeah, it depends. Ilya alluded to this, but it depends how they're enforced. And so, at least at the moment, the fact still remains that 90% of the faculty are I mean, like in the social sciences, like 30% of faculty identify as Marxist.
Wait, I'm sorry. How many? What percent?
Like it's about 30% of social sciences faculty, and like 2% identify as conservatives. So like
Okay.
when that's the mix you're dealing with, it's it's pretty hard to say things that half the American public agree with. So
Wait a
that's
minute. Oh, wait a minute. Here, my math. 30% self-identify as Marxists, 3% self-identify as conservatives. I mean, that's 33%. I mean, we still have like 60 something percent who aren't either, right? Who are,
yeah. So I mean, the reason I brought that up is just because even being a moderate is right wing,
oh, okay.
and so like it goes from Marxist to left wing Democrat. That's kind of like the spectrum of political beliefs. And
Wow.
then the people on the right that you find tend to be kind of libertarian business right. But what's really rare are social conservatives, like someone who's going to say abortion is wrong in all cases,
Mhm.
marriage is between a man and woman for life, adultery is always wrong, sex isn't about
Yeah.
those sorts of views are really, really rare. So all I'm saying is you probably could find other communities where it's the opposite skew and it's hard and you get self-censorship the other way. The main problem, though, is that the universities are supposed to be knowledge creating devices, and that doesn't work if like very reasonable perspectives that may explain what's actually going on in the world are excluded. So, like, I mean, in my opinion, the most important thing is to have conservatives and liberals sitting down and, like, if it's always conservatives, sometimes they'll be too resistant to change something that needs to be changed. But if it's always progressives, they just want to change everything and everything's cuckoo. So you got to have some kind of mix, and there's no mix right now. And so it's really a personnel issue. I mean, I actually, if I were the president of the University of Chicago, I would just close whole divisions, just shut them down, and then restart them with hand-picked department chairs,
Mhm.
and have them pick people who were going to have a more interesting discussion about issues. Like, how are you going to have a social science division where 90% of the people are to the left of the average American? You're not
Mhm.
going to be able to address the issues that are facing America in a coherent way, in my opinion. So I guess that's what I would say about this. I mean, on a less extreme scale, you could do things which I proposed to the president and provost, like have so-called cluster hires,
Mhm.
uh, which
Cluster.
that's sort of been an instrument for diversity gerrymandering, but use the technique in a different direction. And so don't say like we're having a cluster hire and we're all going to hire only conservative professors, but just do a cluster hire and pick fields that tend to attract people with conservative views and say anyone in social science division, like any department, if you find someone in like American Constitution, whatever, I mean, Ilya would be able to come up with a better list of things in that area. If you find someone in any of these areas that you can make a case apply, fits these categories, then we'll give you an extra hire. That sort of a thing, like more of an effort like that. And then also just actually, we just got funded at U Chicago. They have this forum for freedom of expression, and I sent it. They call for faculty application, and I sent in an application that just got funded to have a freedom, of intellectual navigation conference. So it's like the U.S. Navy does these freedom of navigation voyages where they sail into a disputed region of the ocean just to prove that they can do it. And the point of this conference is going to invite the most controversial people to talk about the most controversial subjects, as long as they're scholars and not just provocateurs. And it's the purpose is to desensitize people and to reduce that self-censorship. Like, oh, if we can have Michael Bailey come and say that transgenderism is autogynephilia, then maybe we can talk normally about things. So that's kind
Interesting.
of a rambling answer, but that's my perspective.
Yeah.
Can I jump in with a
Oh,
couple?
absolutely. Yes, Zach.
No,
Yeah.
one thing I think folks don't talk about enough are the labor conditions that have created this kind of chilled speech environment. So, like in across higher ed, there's like an adjunctification thing happening where, um, depending on what school you're at, you might see upwards of 60% of faculty positions are adjunct instructors, meaning they're not full-time faculty. They're teaching one or two courses. They're not getting much. They're not getting benefits almost usually. So they're this kind of contingent, disposable professional help, so to speak. Um, it would take a hell of a lot for folks like that to speak out uh,
Uh,
against the
Interesting.
institution. But it's not just that. Even full-time folks aren't necessarily in unions, in teachers' unions, or are not tenured or even on a tenure track. So I think if you reduce the number of faculty to folks who were tenured and or unionized full time, I'd imagine it would probably be somewhere. Dorian, would you have a ballpark figure? I would say maybe 15%.
No idea, because that's not the norm at U Chicago, but I know there's a whole lot of different kind of institutions. But the only way I would push back is look what they did to Amy Wax at UPenn, like a
Hmm.
distinguished name professor.
Yeah,
So people come after you with faculty if they want to.
What happened? Can you remind every people who aren't familiar with Amy Wax what her experience was?
Well, so she had a named chair in law at the University of Pennsylvania, and she made
Mhm.
a variety of comments ranging from standard conservative fare to uh, maybe slightly provocative. And everybody went cuckoo, and they had this crazy star chamber thing, and eventually stripped her of her named professorship and won't pay her, as like 30% of her pay, and blah de blah. And so like they have, they get to even tenured faculty, not just adjunct people. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously an issue that there's a lot of people in the system who are uh, undervalued.
it's a lot harder to push people out who are the Amy Waxes of the world than it is
Yeah.
somebody on the not on who is not unionized, who's on annually renewable contracts.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and so I think if folks felt like they had more job protection and the institution had their back, um, you might have seen a lot more pushback than we've seen
Yeah,
in
well, I mean, but the other issue is so first of all, they have a filtering mechanism to make sure they only get the sheep who get all the way through tenure. So by the time people have tenure, they don't actually use it. Like they've already filtered out everyone who would have used it to say something controversial. And then the other thing is once you have tenure and a big fancy named professorship, you've got a lot to lose. That's the other part of the calculus. They're like, oh, I don't want to, they won't invite me to the faculty club anymore if I say this stuff. I better get in line.
Well, that's the kind of the golden handcuffs. We talk in law firms, we talk about golden handcuffs, that there's always the next thing you're saving up for, and eventually you're just kind of locked in there. And in higher ed, yeah, as you say, the dynamic is, well, I can't say anything because I'm just an assistant professor, and then well, I need to get my grant funded, and then I need my endowed chair, and at the end of the day, you've lived your whole career and you've self-censored, and that's become a kind of a mental habit.
Well, Ilya, I mean, Trump's not stupid, neither. Very few presidents have, uneducated and uninformed people in their administrations, and Trump's no exception. He must have foreseen the circumstances that Dorian and Zach are laying out. This is the real world. So, what do you think he hopes to accomplish with this executive order if we're looking at a lot of adjunct professors and even tenured professors who will just naturally self-censor, and this order won't mean anything for them? I mean,
Well, the federal government can't fix all of higher ed, especially not just by an executive order. So it's using all of these different things to move the Overton window, to at the margins give have professors feel more freedom.
yeah, okay.
And I think that there are other mechanisms that I'm hoping they'll pursue. And so like what I think would really make a difference would be for the federal government to stop giving loans for students, to let that all be private. And then for education loans, to somehow make them be able to be written off in bankruptcy. Now, obviously, like if someone borrows a bunch of money to go to school and then law school and then immediately declares bankruptcy, that's why they can't be written off in bankruptcy now. But I'm thinking like a situation where someone borrows a bunch of money to study a crazy woke field and then works at Starbucks, they should be able to declare bankruptcy, and the person who gave the loan should be responsible. And so if you have something like that, and then basically you have no more students studying these crazy fields, eventually it's going to dry up all the craziness. I think that kind of thing is going to make more difference than just an executive order.
But a lot of times students don't even declare a major, a woke major, let's just say, until they're juniors. But they'll need loans from freshman year on. How would you resolve that? Like you just
I mean, basically I would I'm imagining that the federal government's not giving the loan. So I have to come to a bank and say, I want a loan. And they'll say, what classes are you taking? They look at the classes. It's like calculus, engineering, computer science, and they give you the loan. They look at the classes you're taking, you're signing up for your first year, and it's like lesbian, people of color from the province of Pennsylvania in 1633. And they're like, well, that doesn't look like you're on the path to be able to make money in 10 years.
Okay. All right. Devil's advocate is people arguably don't go to college to make money. They go to open their intellectual horizons and to become curious again. So
yeah, so I agree that's important. And if your dad is a millionaire and that's what you want to do, go for it. But that's not something the federal government should be supporting, in my opinion.
Okay. Interesting.
Well, and the thing is, the federal government can just, this is concomitant with what Dorian is saying. If the schools have skin in the game, then they can be the ones to make those kinds of evaluations. It shouldn't be a federal bureaucrat saying, this is, we don't like the courses you're taking this semester. It's just you make the schools on the hook, and then they'll self-police.
I think I'm not sure which of you raised this issue. Maybe it was you, Dorian, about bankruptcy, but the bankruptcy laws were changed for student loans about, what was it, 25 years ago, 30 years ago? They were once dischargeable like other forms of debt, but now student loans are non-dischargeable. Is that correct, Ilya?
I think that's right.
Yeah. So it's interesting because as they became non-dischargeable, you would think that private banks would be more willing to give loans to students because they're like herpes. But now we find the federal government behind more student loans than ever.
That's the exact problem. Since they're non-dischargeable, you'd think that private lenders would be wary, but then you have the federal government's full faith and credit, and so they're like, great, then there's no downside for us. Why don't you take more loans?
Interesting. Okay. Oh, we have a question here. The question is, actually, it's not a question. It's more of a statement. I'd like you to comment on. I'm also at a community college, and people are freaking out. They think that all cultural months will be gone. For example, Black History Month. Women's organizations, for example, the Women for Society of Engineers, all of that will be eliminated. But it seems these executive orders are more about ensuring hiring and admissions are based on merit and not race or gender. Please speak to this.
It's a little different within the federal government as opposed to grantees. So grantees can't exclude people from educational programming, which includes student organizational programming, based on immutable characteristics. But there's nothing to prevent, Mexican folkloric dancing club or a celebration of Black history or Filipino history or what have you. Within the federal government, it works a little different. So Pete Hegseth, for example, had that famous kind of memo that it was Rumsfeldian snowflake, if you will, but it was very blunt. It's like, DEI equals die, no renaming, no nothing. And so I think affinity groups based on ethnicity are going away from the Pentagon, because that's a much more directly regulatory thing. But at schools and grantees, again, the focus is on exclusion or discrimination based on these categories, whether it's hiring, admissions, or educational programs.
Okay. And I guess lastly, I'd like to turn to anti-Semitism. And I'd like to.
And one more thing, Monica, there's a lot
Yes.
of what's known as malicious enforcement. That is the kind of, after these DEI things, that means you can't have pictures of any ethnic minority relevant stuff at your cubicle, or just saying that since there's no DEI, we can't have tacos at the cafeteria. I mean, all of these sorts of things that are by no means required by the executive orders, but the people who don't like the executive orders are going to say, oh yeah, well, I'm going to stick it to you, and I'm going to do all these things, and I'm going to be really unpopular and annoying, and blame you. And so that's something that the enforcers will have to watch out for.
Interesting.
But Ilya, tacos, wouldn't that be cultural appropriation if I started having tacos and stuff?
Depends who asking. I don't think cultural appropriation is a thing under this administration.
All right. So I would like to get a sense from you.
I'd love to get in a battle between like the Texans and Mexicans about, or for that matter, LA tacos, right? Whose culture is really being appropriated? Where are tacos native to?
My feeling is, in a melting pot or a salad bowl or mosaic, whatever you want to call the United States, I don't see how there should be any such thing as cultural.
Melting pot is for Swiss Americans, I believe.
Is that what it is? The fondue?
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to, the anti-Semitism has been a huge issue, like in this country since October 7th. It's always been with us, but I think it was really highlighted, obviously, after October 7th. And I wanted to get a sense from you, Dorian and Zach, what you've seen on your respective campuses in terms of anti-Semitism. Has it? I don't want to go to Zach, to Dorian's game theory image, but has it waned over time? Has it increased? Has it stayed about the same? And what do you think? What do you think, if anything, this executive order will do to shift that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to take that in one direction, which is that I think some of what's been happening there's sort of this idea. It doesn't get talked enough about the outside influence involved in this. So 5 years ago, the brother of a professor at the University of Chicago, who's Iranian, came to campus. He was there for a couple days, and then he was picked up by the FBI. It turned out he had been casing Hillel and Chabad, taking pictures, potentially for some sort of attack. And he was prosecuted by the federal government for espionage, went into prison, and his whereabouts are now unknown. He's believed to have been exchanged with Iran in some sort of a deal. And so similarly, when we had the protest where they took over our campus, one day, all the same tents showed up, and they arrested people on campus, certain people who were arrested, one with a gun, who were not students and weren't associated with the university at all. And so I think one aspect of this that isn't getting talked enough about is the anti-Semitism thing. Some of it's being drummed up by foreign governments, foreign agents, espionage activities. And so that's a serious issue when we talk about freedom of expression on campus, because it's supposed to be freedom of expression for students and faculty. And it's a real problem when it's being exploited in order to undermine the U.S. government, in order to attack groups of people.
Yeah. Zach, what have you been seeing?
Nothing at all. Community colleges are, my understanding. I just work at one, not all of them in the world, but you have real people. You've got young parents with kids. You've got middle-aged parents with kids. You've got 18 to 20-year-old students with full-time jobs, and they're just trying to pick up a couple courses here and there. They have better things to do than harass Jewish students. You know what I mean? They have lives to live. So that's not a thing at my campus.
And what about when you were in Penn State? Now, I know you were at Penn State before October 7th, right? Yeah, you were at Penn State then. Yeah. So did you see any anti-Semitism then?
it was not in the ether of discussion at all. Like I can't think of any particular events that would have drummed up a need to for those folks to sort of do that virtue signaling crap. So no, I don't remember anything like that happening.
Okay. So circling back to where we started a bit ago, free speech and the impact of this executive order. It sounds like faculty will have limited benefits from this because there are factors separate and apart, exogenous to this executive order, that will probably cause them to continue to self-censor. But maybe there's hope for students. I'm thinking that, again, maybe for Jewish students or maybe for conservative students. What do you think the practical effect will be for these people who really aren't bound by any sort of financial considerations? And, if it seems to me, if anyone can take advantage of the option to speak freely, it's students. Do you think, Dorian, do you think we'll see students speaking more freely on campus, especially conservative students, with this order?
It depends. So the campuses are so different. I mean, Zach's point is really important. If you look at the update of the fire rankings in the last year, one thing you really notice is that state schools and tech schools improved a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a plot going around that showed like percentage of Pell Grants versus like number of protests and encampments that showed a big correlation. So it depends a lot about the campus. Uh, Students in general have a lot to lose. They've got their whole future in front of them, so they tend to stay quiet. I don't see them speaking out a lot. But that said, the students are not the main problem on most of these elite campuses. They're mostly hardworking, good kids who want to get a job and contribute to society and have a family and all those things. It's really about the faculty, and it's mostly about the faculty in the humanities and social sciences who are the cause of these problems.
What is
Big time.
you agree big time? But maybe I'm missing something. But I understand what a professor would have to lose by speaking out. What does a student have to lose?
Well, so they basically their whole like the faculty have the ability to, or at least the way it's perceived by the students, to destroy their future. And they've got a whole future in front of them. So like give them bad grades. Like if you're in a class and you write I had a student tell me that, so this was a Hispanic student, and she told me that she wrote an essay in some Latino or Latinx program, like saying that she didn't think there was systemic racism against Latinos in the US. And the professor wrote on it, see, you're not going to get a better grade until you acknowledge the systemic racism in the US. And so
Wow.
like they could get bad grades. And then, I mean, these kids are so, it's not your uncle's. I mean, my uncle went to college and then like bummed around and then like went to Vietnam as a tourist. This is after the war. And then he, got a job in tech and had a great career. Kids nowadays are super stressed and they don't think that the economy can allow them to be like that. They've got to get the high GPA and the internship after their freshman year and all this stuff. And any bad grade's going to disrupt it. And so that's what's keeping them quiet.
Yeah, but I mean, there has to be some recourse for a student who received a comment like that on a paper and exam. Couldn't you go to, I don't know, the dean of students or the provost or someone and make a claim or complaint?
So I didn't follow up on exactly what that student did, but the point is, if there are faculty doing that, then students get in line. Or like after the election this time, another student came to me and said his computer science professor spent the first 15 minutes in sort of like a crying session about what had happened and how evil Orange Hitler had been elected and blah, blah, blah. So like when faculty are doing that, students, they just get the sense like, okay, I'm going to keep my mouth shut, keep my head down. I mean, that's what this guy told me in particular. Like, I just want to do CS. I don't want anyone to bother me. I keep my mouth shut and get my degree and get out of here.
It's interesting. So, I mean, I think this is all very important because what I'm hearing is what I kind of sensed from the beginning we were talking about in our practice session, which is there's a difference between, enforcing the law and what we see on paper and the guidelines on paper and reality. And it sounds to me like it's going to take a lot more work to get the culture at colleges and universities to change. It's not going to happen with the swipe of a pen or an executive order, or maybe not even, Zach, with fully with the litigation that you're involved in. It's a process. It's going to take some time.
I think if everyone in America buys my book, that would be that would make a big impact on the.
Why don't you put that in the chat and we'll get you started with that, Ilya. Oh, very interesting. Let's, Ilya, since you're talking now, there's any last words before we wrap up? Anything you want to leave us with?
I'll leave you with Churchill's words that this is not it's not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. It might just be the end of the beginning. There's going to have to be follow-up. And so you don't, change a culture overnight. You don't change the law or its application or its understanding overnight. So we'll see how the relevant federal officials enforce all this stuff. It's definitely a good start. It's definitely well lawyered and, clearly thought out. They used the transition period well.
Yes. Okay. Dorian, any last words?
No, it was a fun discussion. Thanks for hosting it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Zach, I know you always have something to say.
I'll leave us with a comedic graphic I saw recently. 2 + 2 equals DEI, which kind of speaks to, I think, the truth, like DEI organizations being like the arbiters of what can and can't be said. So I really hope that starts to change. And I think this executive order is going to help folks get back to why everyone's in college in the first place. And that's to learn, to become the best version of yourself, to get the skills you want, to get ahead in life, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Amen to that. Amen. Thank you very much, all three of you, for being here tonight, for participating in such a lively discussion. And to all of our viewers, I'd just like to remind you that, as I always do, FAIR exists entirely on goodwill. We operate solely based on donations from curious and interested people like yourselves. We do our very best to provide programming and content that's educational and that helps bring awareness, attention, and solutions to what we feel at FAIR are the most timely and relevant issues facing us. So we hope you'll consider donating to FAIR and joining our pro-human movement to help us keep doing the work that you all value. So we're going to put a link in the chat, or of course, you can always visit us at www.fairforall.org to make a generous contribution. So with that, let's wrap up. And again, thank you all. And thank you especially to my guests tonight, Dorian, Ilya, and Zach. And we will see you at the next webinar. Take care.
Thank you, Monica. Good night, guys.